Shockingly, the royal palace descended into chaos when former Queen Camilla attacked King William in front of his aides, right inside Windsor's marble halls. But what she never expected was the royal guard stepping in, arresting her on the spot under royal law. That single act changed everything about the monarchy's future. What happened next will leave you speechless. Watch till the end, like this video, and subscribe for more royal revelations. The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving Windsor's cobblestones slick with reflection. It was the kind of quiet morning that seemed calm only because everything underneath it had already changed. Sergeant Dorian Wells stood in the archway beneath the western portico, his gloved hands clasped firmly behind his back. 38 years old, veteran of 9 deployments, 4 years in ceremonial rotation, but never a moment like this. 3 days earlier, King Charles had abdicated. There had been no fanfare, no televised farewell, only a sealed letter and a single directive to the royal guard. Protect the line, not the noise. From that moment, it was William, no longer heir, now sovereign. Every move he made was measured, recorded, whispered through corridors still adjusting to his reign. Dorian's assignment changed the same day. No longer part of the outer ceremonial detail, he was reassigned to the personal perimeter, the king's inner guard. It was an honor and a burden that allowed no mistakes. At 7:10 sharp, the convoy began forming beneath the eastern arch. 2 Range Rovers, 1 decoy, 1 command, idled as aides moved briskly around them. The king was to address the Royal Legacy Committee, his first private meeting without his father present. The order was clear: no staffers, no leaks, no distractions. But distraction came anyway. The sound of heels cut through the courtyard like the crack of glass. Dorian looked up. Through the misted colonnade walked Camilla, no longer addressed as queen by anyone in the palace, though no one dared say it to her face. Her presence drew silence the way thunder draws stillness. Without protocol, without announcement, she strode directly into the marble corridor where King William stood with his aides. The guards stiffened, unsure whether to intervene. Camilla's voice rang out before anyone could speak. "You are an ungrateful child wearing your mother's crown like a costume." The aides froze. William turned, his expression controlled, but behind his eyes burned the storm of a man balancing grief with duty. "Camilla," he said calmly, "this is neither the place nor the hour." She stepped closer. "You speak to me of hours? I gave decades to this palace while your mother's shadow haunted every step, and now you pretend I am a ghost to be erased?" William said nothing. Instead, he turned away, an act meant to end the confrontation. But Camilla's anger was not finished. She shoved him. The sound of the shove, a sharp thud against the king's shoulder, echoed down the marble hall. Papers fell. Gasps followed. And in that silence, Sergeant Dorian moved. He stepped forward, not out of hesitation, but conviction. He did not wait for permission. He invoked the oath he had sworn before the crown, not to a person, but to the law that governed them all. "By order of Crown Statute 12, he said firmly. "You are under detainment for assault on the sovereign." Camilla blinked, stunned. "You cannot be serious." Dorian did not flinch. "It is not my place to measure seriousness, Your Grace, only to uphold order." 2 guards stepped forward beside him. The aides looked away. William raised a hand slightly, his voice low but steady. "Sergeant Wells, proceed by protocol." Those words sealed it. Dorian nodded once, signaling the guards. Camilla's fury turned to disbelief as they escorted her from the hall. She struggled briefly but realized resistance would only deepen the humiliation. The sight of the former queen being led away through Windsor's gates in silence was something no one would forget. That afternoon, the news spread across the palace like wildfire. "Camilla has been arrested." Some whispered it in shock, others in relief. A few even said it was poetic justice. But for Dorian it was not triumph. It was duty fulfilled in its most painful form. He knew the world outside would turn the moment into scandal, twisting truth into spectacle. Yet within those walls, something else had shifted. The old silence that had protected power had finally been broken. That night, as rain began to fall again, Dorian stood in the guard post overlooking the southern gate. Through the glass, He could see the distant lights of the small royal detention annex where Camilla was being held under security review. He removed his cap and rested it on the desk, his reflection merging with the wet glass. The words of his commander echoed faintly in his memory. "A true guard does not defend faces, Sergeant. He defends principles." For the first time, Dorian understood what that meant. Tomorrow would bring inquiries, investigations, and chaos from the outside world. But tonight, Windsor stood still, and so did he, knowing the line had been drawn, and he had been the one to draw it. By morning, the palace air had turned heavier than the fog outside. The marble halls of Windsor whispered with half-truths and restless steps. Some said Camilla had only pushed him out of anger. Others claimed it was an attempt to strike. But none of those whispers mattered now, because for the first time in royal history, a former queen consort had been detained under the authority of the King's Guard. Sergeant Dorian Wells had not slept. The official report had been written and sealed at midnight. He had spent the remaining hours on silent patrol, his mind caught between duty and disbelief. Arresting Camilla had not been an act of defiance, it had been an act of principle. Yet he knew the palace would not see it that way. At 8 a.m., a messenger arrived from the Royal Inquiry Office. The message was simple: report to the Crown Chamber. When Dorian entered, the scene was already set. King William stood by the window, his posture calm but guarded. Across from him sat Lady Marian Hale, the head of the Crown Council, known for her stern sense of justice and razor-edged diplomacy. The table between them held a single folder, the inquiry into the incident. "Sergeant Wells," Lady Hale began, her tone even, "you invoked Crown Statute 12 and detained a royal consort. Do you understand the severity of such action?" "Yes, ma'am," Dorian replied. "But the statute leaves no exemption. Assault upon the sovereign, regardless of title, demands immediate detainment." Lady Hale glanced at the king. "And you confirm she made physical contact?" William's eyes were steady. "I do. She shoved me." "It was not injury, it was intent." Dorian kept his gaze forward. "Protocol required intervention, Your Majesty." William nodded. "And I commend it." Those words, though calm, cut through the tension like sunlight through fog. Lady Hale frowned slightly. "Your Majesty, commendation is premature. This incident could provoke public unrest if mishandled." William turned toward her, his voice controlled. "Then we will handle it with honesty. The monarchy cannot demand respect while hiding truth." The commissioner hesitated. "If the media learns the queen consort was detained by force—" "She is no longer the consort," William interrupted gently. "My father's abdication made that position vacant. Her role is ceremonial, not sovereign." Dorian stood silent, but inside, he felt the gravity of the words. The line between power and legacy had been erased in one morning. Lady Hale exhaled slowly. "Then I will prepare the statement, Your Majesty. But Sergeant Wells must still face a review. It is custom." William looked to him again. "Custom may question him. I will not. He did what every guard is sworn to do, protect the crown, not the comfort of those around it." Dorian saluted. "Thank you, Your Majesty." After the meeting, he walked through the courtyard toward the command barracks. Guards who passed him did so in silence. Some nodded subtly, others looked away, afraid that acknowledgement could cost them. Loyalty in Windsor had always been political, but after yesterday, it had become dangerous. In the lower wing, he found his fellow guards gathered around a small radio broadcasting early news reports. The voice of the announcer carried the tension that now ruled the kingdom. Sources confirmed that an internal royal security incident occurred yesterday involving former Queen Camilla and the newly appointed King William. The palace has not issued an official statement. One guard turned off the radio as Dorian entered. "Sergeant," he said quietly, "they are saying you manhandled her." Dorian shook his head. "They can say what they want. I followed law." "But the law," another guard said, "is not what the palace follows when it is inconvenient." Dorian paused, then replied, "Then maybe it is time it should." Later that day, he received an anonymous note slipped under his door. It was unsigned, written in clean handwriting. "She is demanding release by nightfall. The order will come through private channel. Do not act until official notice." He knew what that meant. Someone was trying to override the legal chain. Camilla still had allies. people who feared her anger more than they respected the king's authority. That night, as rain tapped softly on his window, Dorian reviewed the royal statutes again. He found the line that defined his decision. A guard's loyalty extends first to the sovereign, second to the state, and never to personal favor. Those words gave him strength. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair. Tomorrow the council would meet again. Tomorrow they might demand he reverse the order. But he had made his choice. He would not release her without the king's signature. Somewhere deep within Windsor's detention wing, Camilla waited, her fury cold and controlled. She was already planning her next move, and she would not stay silent for long. By the third morning, the calm that Windsor once carried had vanished completely. The palace, once a fortress of tradition and quiet loyalty, now pulsed with anxiety. Staff whispered in corners, guards kept their conversations clipped, and every closed door felt like a barrier between truth and consequence. Sergeant Dorian Wells felt it in the air, the unease that follows when power is wounded but refuses to admit it. He had carried out his duty exactly as the law required. Yet the silence from the upper chambers told him that something was moving behind the scenes. The official inquiry had not released its verdict, and Camilla remained under royal detention, but whispers of intervention had already started. A few of her old allies, former advisors, friends of Charles, and several senior aides were quietly demanding her release. They said her outburst had been provoked, that William had humiliated her by cutting her allowance and removing her royal privileges. To them, she was not guilty. She was grieving. But Dorian knew better. He had seen her face in that corridor. That was not grief. That was rage, the kind born from entitlement, not sorrow. By noon, a courier arrived at the guard command post, carrying an envelope sealed with a gold emblem. It was addressed directly to Dorian. The message was short but cold. Release Her Majesty immediately under temporary royal pardon pending further review. No public announcement. The signature below stopped him cold. It bore the initials H.M., Harold Merton, Chancellor of the Royal Council. Merton again. The same man who had meddled in countless quiet affairs of the crown during Charles's last years. A politician dressed in honor, always close to power, but never trusted by those who truly served it. Dorian knew the letter was not legitimate. A royal pardon could come only from the king's personal seal, and this one carried none. It was a forged order, a political trick meant to undo the guard's act of courage before it could inspire others. He folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and locked it in the steel safe behind his desk. Moments later, the door opened. Captain Reeves, his immediate superior, stepped in, his face tight with unease. "Sergeant Wells, I just received word. You are being reassigned to outer perimeter duty until further notice." Dorian stared at him. "Reassigned? Who ordered that?" Reeves hesitated. "The Chancellor. And the King?" "He was not consulted," Reeves said quietly. Dorian nodded slowly. "Then I am not moving." "Dorian, listen," the captain warned, lowering his voice. "You have already made enemies. Do not add fuel. They want her out quietly. They want this whole thing erased before it reaches the press. Then they can erase me after," Dorian replied. Reeves sighed. "You are playing a dangerous game." "It stopped being a game the moment she shoved the king," Dorian said, his tone firm. "You know what this means if I back down now. The law will become a tool for those who break it." Reeves stared at him for a moment, then said nothing more. He turned and left, the sound of his boots fading down the hall. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the castle towers, Dorian made his way toward the East Wing detention annex. Two guards stood at the door, their faces blank but nervous. "Everything in order?" he asked. "Yes, Sergeant," one replied. "Though there was an attempt earlier." Dorian frowned. "Attempt?" "Someone tried to access the cell records using override codes. We shut it down before it went through." Dorian's stomach turned. They were getting desperate. He stepped inside. The air was cold and dry, the corridor lined with only 3 holding chambers. At the end of the hall, Camilla sat within a glass-partitioned room, dressed not in her royal attire, but in a plain black coat. Her posture was rigid, her expression unreadable. When she saw him, she smiled faintly. So the hero of Windsor comes to visit the prisoner. I came to ensure no one tampers with your case, Dorian said evenly. How noble, she replied softly. You think you have defended the crown, but you have only humiliated it. Dorian met her gaze. You struck the king. That is humiliation enough. Her lips curled into a slight smirk. Oh, Sergeant, you really believe he is the one in power, do you? You think William commands loyalty because of his title. The monarchy breathes only because I allowed it to. My silence kept its scandals buried. My hand guided its public face. And you just tore that veil away. He said nothing. She leaned closer to the glass. The king is young, naive. He will realize soon enough that even his crown depends on the whispers of the powerful. When that happens, you will be dismissed as the guard who overstepped. The headlines will forget your name, but I will not. Dorian's voice was calm, but his eyes were like iron. My name does not need remembering. My duty does, she laughed softly. Then remember this, soldier. You think you've drawn the line, but lines in this palace always move. He turned and walked away, her laughter echoing down the corridor. By midnight, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Thunder shook the palace, and lightning lit the towers like flares. Dorian stood in the courtyard once again, watching the rain slash against the stone. He knew this was far from over. The Chancellor would make his move soon. The king would have to choose between loyalty and peace. And somewhere deep inside the palace, power was shifting again. But this time the guard was ready. The storm that rolled across Windsor that night did not end with the morning. Lightning had carved the horizon clean, but the palace still felt heavy, as if thunder had left its echo trapped inside the stone. Sergeant Dorian Wells knew that kind of quiet. It was the silence before betrayal. By dawn, the palace courtyard was sealed off under maintenance. That was the word used whenever something happened the crown did not want seen. The outer guard rotation had been changed. The corridors he had patrolled for years were now lined with unfamiliar faces, men wearing the uniform of the king, but answering to someone else. He was reading the security ledger when Captain Reeves appeared at his office door, his face pale, his voice low. It has begun, he said. What has? Dorian asked. The Chancellor convened an emergency council before sunrise. He is moving to nullify your arrest order. He claims the king's safety was never at risk, and that detainment of a royal relative was excessive force. Dorian set down his pen. The king signed my report himself, Reeves nodded grimly. Then they will claim the king acted under pressure. Outside, the bells tolled 8 times. The sound felt more like warning than routine. Dorian rose from his chair, straightened his coat, and said, If they mean to erase the truth, they will have to do it with their own hands. I will not. He left the office and strode toward the east corridor. Every guard he passed lowered his gaze. The loyalty that had once bound them now cracked under fear. When he reached the royal wing, 2 senior guards blocked his path. By order of the Chancellor, one said stiffly, you are restricted from entering the detention annex. Dorian stared at them for a moment, his jaw tight. By order of the king, he replied, I am responsible for its security. Stand aside. The guards hesitated, eyes darting toward each other. The pause told him everything. This was not about duty anymore. It was about sides. Stand aside, he repeated, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had spent his life serving the crown's laws, not its politics. The guards moved. Slowly, but they moved. Dorian entered the annex and found Camilla's cell empty. For the first time in years, his breath caught. The door was unlocked, the chain seal broken. The chair she had sat on was overturned, and on the glass partition, someone had left a handprint smeared faintly with red nail polish. Hers. He turned sharply to the warden's office. The records had already been cleared. The guard logbook was missing. Only one note lay on the desk, written in hurried ink. Transfer authorized. Eastgate clearance, 0540 a.m. He checked the clock. It was nearly 9. She had been gone for 3 hours. Outside, the rain began again, thin, gray, relentless. Dorian made his way across the motor court toward the Eastgate control post. The gate sergeant on duty, a young recruit, stiffened as he approached. Who cleared the vehicle at dawn? Dorian demanded. The recruit swallowed hard. An officer, sir. From the Chancellor's office. He showed temporary clearance papers. Said the Queen was to be escorted to private residence for medical evaluation. Description, Dorian snapped. Tall, mid-40s, dark coat. Accompanied by 2 men in plain suits. Merton's men. Dorian exhaled slowly, the anger coiling inside him like a drawn blade. Do you have the vehicle registration? The recruit nodded and handed him the log. Royal Transport Unit 13A, silver Bentley, no escort detail listed. He stared at the entry, then folded the log and walked toward the nearest radio terminal. The palace line was encrypted, monitored by the council. But he had another frequency, a private link that connected directly to the king's chamber. Your Majesty, he said into the receiver. Voice low. This is Sergeant Wells. The detainee has been removed under false authorization. It was Merton. There was silence for several seconds. Then William's voice came through, cold and deliberate. Find her, Sergeant. Do not wait for orders. Find her before they use her to undo what we have begun. Yes, Your Majesty. Dorian hung up and turned toward the courtyard, rain beating against his hat brim. He motioned to the transport division and ordered 2 pursuit vehicles prepared. His team moved quickly, their loyalty unspoken but absolute. By mid-morning, they were outside the palace grounds, heading down the narrow lanes that led toward the old estate roads. The countryside blurred past in streaks of wet green. The radio buzzed with updates, false leads, conflicting routes. But then came the call that made his pulse quicken. Sir, the driver said, we have a signal. A royal vehicle was logged at the Rivervale checkpoint 20 minutes ago. No escort. Direction, east. Hold speed, Dorian ordered. Minutes later, the silver Bentley came into view ahead, its sleek body cutting through the mist. He signaled the driver to pull closer. The windshield wipers thudded in rhythm as they drew beside it. Dorian could see the driver, one of Merton's aides, and in the back seat, the unmistakable figure of Camilla. When she noticed the pursuing car, she turned her face toward him through the rain-streaked glass. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes carried that same quiet defiance, the look of someone who believed she could not fall. He radioed his men. Box her in. 2 vehicles closed from either side. The Bentley slowed, then stopped on the narrow country road. Dorian stepped out into the rain, his boots splashing through puddles. He approached the door, hand steady on the handle. Your Grace, he said calmly through the open window. You are in breach of Crown detention protocol. Step out of the vehicle, Camilla smiled faintly. You never stop, do you, Sergeant? I follow law, not orders, he said. And yet, she replied, you serve a king who does not know what to do with truth. Before he could answer, one of Merton's aides reached for a concealed pistol. Dorian's reaction was immediate. He disarmed the man in one swift motion, pressing him against the hood. The other aide froze. Camilla's calm cracked for the first time. You would lay hands on royal officials? Only when they use them to break the law, he replied. Within minutes, his team secured the scene. The Bentley's doors opened, and for the second time, the former queen found herself surrounded by the very guards she once commanded. This time, however, there were no cameras, no audience, only the rain and the sound of duty reclaiming its ground. As she was escorted back to the palace, Dorian walked beside her in silence. For all her pride, she looked smaller now, still dignified, but without the armor of arrogance. Tell me, Sergeant, she said softly as they passed the gates. Do you think truth will save you when power turns against you? He looked at her, his voice steady. No, Your Grace, but it will remember me when power forgets itself. She said nothing more. Back inside Windsor, thunder rolled again, and the bells began to ring. 3 short, 2 long, the signal for royal breach contained. The sound carried across the castle like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. Dorian removed his soaked gloves, his hands trembling not from fear but from the weight of what he had done. For the second time in days, he had arrested a woman who once believed herself untouchable. And somewhere in the upper halls, King William listened to the echo of those bells and whispered, "Perhaps the crown is finally clean again." Windsor's bells had barely stopped ringing when the storm behind the palace walls began again. Not thunder, but voices, orders, secrets turned into warnings, and beneath it all, a single truth hung like a shadow. Chancellor Harold Merton's plan had failed. Sergeant Dorian Wells had brought Camilla back to Windsor alive. That alone had shattered the council's silence. But the Chancellor was not finished. Men like him did not lose quietly. By noon, the palace corridors were filled with unusual movement. Couriers with sealed documents, advisors rushing between chambers, and royal guards being reassigned faster than they could unpack their orders. Dorian watched it all unfold from the west balcony. He had lived through sieges and state conflicts, but this was something worse. A silent war fought with signatures instead of swords. Captain Reeves approached, his tone sharp. "The Chancellor is calling an emergency assembly in the King's Court. Every senior official is required to attend." Dorian's jaw tightened. "And the King?" "He will be there." Merton requested it personally. Dorian glanced down at the courtyard below, where Camilla's return had been hushed into silence. She was being held in the secure East Wing under direct supervision, but that meant little. Merton had influence in every corner of the Crown's machinery. The captain hesitated before adding, "Dorian, watch your back. Merton will make this about you." "I expect nothing less," Dorian said. When the chamber doors opened, the room was already full. Every member of the Royal Council sat in their appointed seat, their faces masks of civility. At the head of the room stood Merton, calm, polished, smiling. The kind of man who looked like he owned the truth, even when he was rewriting it. King William entered moments later, dressed not in royal regalia but in a plain black suit, a symbol of humility or perhaps restraint. Dorian stood to the side, silent, his hands clasped behind his back. "Your Majesty," Merton began smoothly, "we are gathered to resolve a matter that threatens not only your reputation but the stability of the monarchy itself." William's eyes narrowed slightly. "Proceed," Merton gestured toward Dorian. "This man, Sergeant Wells, acted outside royal command when he detained and later rearrested Her Majesty Queen Camilla. His actions have sparked outrage across several departments and risked serious diplomatic fallout." The room murmured. Dorian remained still. Merton continued, his tone almost sympathetic. "I do not question the sergeant's loyalty, but loyalty must serve wisdom. Arresting the Queen twice in 1 week? It paints our sovereign not as strong, but divided. The people will not see courage. They will see chaos." William spoke quietly, his voice calm but sharp. "And what would you have done, Chancellor? Ignore an assault upon the throne?" Merton smiled faintly. "The throne is an idea, Your Majesty. Ideas cannot be assaulted. People can. And sometimes mercy preserves strength better than punishment." Dorian stepped forward, breaking his silence. "With respect, Chancellor, mercy without justice is surrender." All heads turned. Merton's smile thinned. "You forget your place, Sergeant." "I remember it well," Dorian replied. "It is my place to protect the sovereign, even from those who confuse control with loyalty." The chamber erupted in whispers. William raised a hand. Silence returned instantly. He looked from Dorian to Merton, then spoke with quiet authority. "I have listened to both of you. Now let us speak plainly. Sergeant Wells acted under the laws of this kingdom. Laws my father, my grandmother, and every ruler before them upheld. You call his actions chaos, Chancellor. I call them courage." Merton's eyes flickered. "Your Majesty, you risk alienating the very council that secures your reign." William stepped forward, his tone cutting through the air. "Then perhaps my reign should not rely on men who fear truth." A stunned silence followed. The king turned to the guards. "Bring forward the evidence Sergeant Wells recovered." Dorian produced a sealed folder, the forged letter of release bearing Merton's initials. He laid it on the council table. Gasps rippled through the room as the king broke the seal and read aloud, "Release Her Majesty immediately under temporary royal pardon pending further review." The signature gleamed clearly under the light. H. Merton. William lifted his gaze. "You forged my authority, Chancellor. You defied my order. You turned the law into a weapon for your ambition." Merton stood frozen, his confidence cracking. "Your Majesty." Enough," William said. His voice was no longer calm. You have manipulated this institution for years, hiding behind law while poisoning it. That ends today, he turned toward Dorian. As of this moment, you are reinstated as Commander of the Royal Guard. You will oversee the arrest of Harold Merton on charges of forgery, obstruction, and treason. The room erupted in disbelief. Merton backed away, but 2 guards stepped forward, seizing his arms. His mask of control finally shattered. You cannot do this, he shouted. I am the Crown's voice. No, William said quietly. You were its echo. The guards dragged him from the chamber. The heavy doors shut behind him, and for the first time in weeks, Windsor felt lighter. William turned to Dorian. You have restored something I thought was lost, the courage to act without fear of consequence. Dorian bowed. The courage was never lost, Your Majesty. It only needed someone willing to remember it. That night, when the bells rang across the city, they no longer told warnings or funerals. They rang for renewal. The Crown had survived its test not through blood, but through truth, and in the silence that followed, Sergeant Dorian Wells stood at his post once more, the rain returning softly over the courtyard. For the first time in years, Windsor breathed freely. By sunrise, the storm had passed, leaving Windsor drenched in golden light. The rain washed the soot of deceit from its stone walls, and for the first time in months, the flag above the castle flew high without the weight of scandal. But the echoes of the past days still lingered, the whispers, the confrontation, and the sound of Merton's voice being silenced as he was led away. Sergeant Dorian Wells stood at his post in the northern courtyard, the same ground where it had all begun. He had seen the rise and fall of many men inside these walls, kings, chancellors, guards who traded honor for comfort. But never had the line between duty and defiance felt so razor-thin. The doors of the royal chapel opened, and King William emerged. His eyes, tired yet resolute, met Dorian's across the courtyard. He motioned for him to follow. Together they walked through the quiet corridors of the East Wing, the wing where Camilla had once reigned in elegance and silence. Now it was stripped bare. Her portraits had been taken down. The scent of her perfume had faded into the stone. She was no longer the power behind the throne, only a lesson in what power could destroy. William stopped near the great window overlooking the palace grounds. You know, he said softly, my father once told me that every throne is made of invisible sacrifices. He said the people see the crown but not the hands that hold it steady. Dorian nodded. Your Majesty, sometimes those hands must bleed to keep it from falling. The king looked at him with quiet gratitude. You bled for it, Sergeant. Not with wounds, but with the weight of doing what was right when the world demanded you look away. Dorian bowed his head. It was never about courage, Your Majesty. It was about remembering who we serve, not the crown, but the truth beneath it. William turned toward the sunlight, his voice thoughtful. You have reminded this palace of something it forgot, that service is not silence. It is the act of standing tall when others kneel. He paused, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small polished medal. It gleamed faintly, etched with the emblem of the late queen, the same one Dorian had once protected when all others had turned away. This, the king said, was designed for those who defend legacy without seeking reward. It has no title, no name, no ceremony. But today, it belongs to you. He pinned it carefully on Dorian's uniform. The metal was cool against the fabric, yet it burned with meaning. Your Majesty, Dorian said quietly, if I may speak freely. William smiled faintly. You always do. Do not let this place change you. Power bends even the strongest men. But if you hold truth the way you hold compassion, the crown will serve you, not consume you. The king nodded slowly. And you, Sergeant, what will you do now? Dorian looked out the window at the courtyard below, where the new recruits were already beginning their morning drill. Train those who will come after me to remember this week, he said. To remember that a guard's duty does not end at the gates. William's expression softened. The kingdom will remember you, Dorian, not as a soldier, but as the conscience that stood when others bowed. Outside, the church bells began to toll again, clear, strong, and unbroken. Later that day, as Dorian stood in the courtyard once more, he felt something shift within him. The palace no longer felt heavy. The guards around him looked different too, steadier, prouder, like men who had seen truth and understood its cost. He looked toward the flag above Windsor, fluttering against the clear sky. For all its beauty, it was still just fabric, fragile like every man who served it. But behind it now stood something greater than ceremony or lineage: integrity. Dorian placed his cap back on, straightened his shoulders, and whispered to himself, "The guard protects more than kings. He protects the meaning of the crown." As he turned to resume his post, the camera of the world faded to that image: a lone guard standing beneath the royal banner, sunlight breaking through the clouds, and for the first time in a long time, Windsor Castle stood not as a monument to power, but as a symbol of truth restored. If you believe truth is the strongest armor and courage the purest crown, then like this video, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more powerful royal sagas that remind us what real honor looks like.